I bought it for the board meeting with the bank the other day. Good morning. If I could have your attention, please. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name is Gillian Riley, and I'm honored to be the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto and your co-host for today's event. Thank you for joining us. Je m'appelle Gillian Riley, présidente du Club canadien du Toronto. Bonjour les téléspectateurs. Merci de nous rejoindre sur Internet aujourd'hui. Our club offers members and guests a diversity of opinions that causes reflection and sometimes inspires action. In creating innovative and relevant programming, we strive to ensure not only a diversity of perspectives, but of speakers as well. Here, we offer access to dynamic political and business and public figures. Our federal finance minister is a great example. I do want to express thanks to today's event sponsors. Canadian Credit Union Association, represented by Canadian Credit Union Association, represented by Rick. Where's Rick? Rick, thank you. Carpenters District Council of Ontario, represented by Nikki Holland. Nikki, thank you. And Great Gulf Residential, represented by Christopher Wine. Thank you. Let me just remind you, if you have any questions, please jot them down on the Q&A cards that will be provided at your tables, and our volunteers will collect them. Today, we are very pleased to welcome Canada's Finance Minister, the Honourable Bill Morneau, to offer details on his third budget, just tabled 2 days ago. The Finance Minister has appeared on several occasions at our joint events with the Empire Club to provide financial updates or to present details of the government's annual budget. His presence is always welcomed and much appreciated. We like that you use our podium to outline the fiscal strategies that your department plans to implement to support economic growth and development in this country. The theme of gender equality in the budget has not gone unnoticed. What a breath of fresh air. By way of background, it might interest you to know that the federal minister was once a member of the Government of Ontario's Pension Advisory Council. In 2012, he was appointed Pension Investment Advisor to Ontario's Finance Minister. Minister Morneau co-authored a book, The Real Retirement, and has authored numerous articles on public policy issues. And of course, he was also head of Morneau Shepell prior to being elected to Ottawa. Minister Morneau will share some budget 2018 insights with us and then sit down with Amanda Lang, anchor BNN Bloomberg. Amanda, of course, is an award-winning journalist and author and a former director of the Canadian Club. We are lucky to have her, and she often comes to our podium. Mr. Morneau and Ms. Lang, the podium is yours.
Good morning. Thanks very much, Gillian, for introducing me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank, I guess, both Gillian and Barbara from the Economic Club and the Empire Club and the Canadian Club for hosting this morning. I have the great opportunity to talk about what of course I believe is an important milestone in our plan to make a difference for Canadians this morning. But I'm also really pleased to be in Toronto to talk to people that I've known for many years, as well as some people who've come from other places to be here. So I see the former Premier Christy Clark from British Columbia, so it's very nice to have you here. We share one thing. My head of communications and someone who's going to be taking a really important role with me at the Minister of Finance role in Ottawa is the former head of communications for the British Columbia government, Ben Shin. So I get to hear lots of stories about British Columbia, which are mainly all good, just so you know. I also see some other people here that I know. I see Paul Spafford over here. So when you're in the role of Minister of Finance, you get these errant emails every once in a while with ideas and advice. So, send them on. Paul sends them to me on quite a regular basis. And I apologize, Paul, I don't always reply, but you can consider today's speech a reply to your most recent long email about our government's economic policies. So it's really a pleasure to see so many of you here this morning. I terrified my wife this morning because we were in the car coming down here, and she looked at the piece of paper I took out of my top pocket, and it's this piece of paper. She said, "Oh my God, you're giving a speech for 20 minutes with that piece of paper." And I said to her, if I haven't figured out what's in the budget by now, we are all in very deep trouble. So I want you to know before I start with Amanda this morning that it's an auspicious week for Amanda Lang. She's getting married on Saturday, which is...
Thank you.
So this is my way of buttering her up to ask really nice questions later. Anyway, I know she doesn't want a stressful week, so we'll keep it very, very low-key. So it's truly the case that I have a privilege to be here in front of you, acting as your Minister of Finance. We have been working hard over the last few years to make an important difference in our economy, but most importantly, an important difference in the lives of Canadians. I think you've probably read some of the coverage around our budget this year. It's really one that's focused on how we can make a lasting difference in our country by thinking about how we can give all Canadians a real and fair opportunity for success. We realize that not everyone does get that in our economy as well as we do. I think the example I like to give people about how much the next generation is ahead of us is one from my house. A couple weeks ago, I was at home and all my kids are away at school. I was walking around our house because Nancy was not there, and when you're alone as a dad in the house and all your kids are gone, you're sort of lonely. And I walked by one of my daughter's rooms and I saw a sign behind her bed, which I hadn't noticed before, and it was a handwritten sign. And on the sign it said, "We cannot all succeed if half of us are held back." And for me, it was a blinding flash of the obvious. What she was saying was that, in fact, if we have a situation where women and girls don't have the opportunities that men and boys have, we can't possibly meet up to our full potential. So I thought my daughter was pretty smart, and then I came to my office and my team told me that, in fact, it was a Malala quote. But nonetheless, she was quoting Malala, which I think is a good thing. And it really gave me something to frame what we're trying to do. We are really trying to think about how we can deal with some really significant long-term challenges that our country faces. But maybe I can start with where we are today, as opposed to what we're trying to do for the future. Where are we? We're a couple of years in as a government, 2.5 years. We obviously came into office saying that importantly for us was to make investments in Canadians, to grow our economy. What have we seen over the last year and a half? Canada has grown at the fastest rate among G7 countries. So for 6 quarters in a row, that's the kind of results we've seen. What have we seen in terms of employment? Well, in the last 2 years, we've grown 600,000 new jobs in this country. We now have among the lowest rates of unemployment we've seen in about 40 years. So if we think about our first and most important goal, getting Canadians working, a recognition that Canada works if Canadians are working. That's where we're at today. We're in a much better position than we started with. We have some pretty great attributes in this country that we started with and things that we've maintained and want to enhance. We have among G7 countries the lowest amount of debt to our economy, so the lowest debt to GDP. This is a really important position that we're in. People often talk about our income statement, but it is important to look at our balance sheet. It's less than half the average of G7 countries. Now, what have we done over the course of the last few years? Well, we've said to Canadians that we want to maintain that very good fiscal position. And more importantly than that, we want to reduce that amount of debt as a function of our economy each and every year. That's what we showed in our budget this year. That's our continuing commitment to make sure that we retain that very strong fiscal position, not only for today, but for the future. Now, there's a number of factors that have led to this really strong position. Obviously, the fact that we made significant investments in Canadians in the budget in 2016, the budget in 2017, that's had an important impact. The first thing we did, you'll remember, was we put in place a thing called the Canada Child Benefit, which changes the way we deliver child benefits, so 9 out of 10 families get significantly more. But it's mean tested. So that means that for those 9 out of 10 families, they got an average $2,300 more after tax per year. Our idea, of course, was that if we give money to people who really need it, at a time when they really need it, they would put it back into the economy. That's been an important factor in growing our economy over the last 2 years. But there's other factors as well. We've seen a swing back in Alberta, because of course we were in pretty difficult straits in Alberta back in 2015. Still more to be done, of course, but that's been a positive impact. We've seen a continuing impact, positive impact from the housing sector. We've seen a continuing positive impact, and this is really positive for us now, and we hope that this continues to be the case, from the global economy, which has firmed up and strengthened over the last couple of years. And finally, we have accommodative interest rates. So interest rates still present good opportunities for businesses and individuals to borrow. So the economy has gone well over the last 2 years. But our long-term insight is that we can't rest on that. We have to recognize that we have significant long-term issues that we need to deal with. The most important one of which, of course, is demographics. We hit last year an important milestone. More Canadians over the age of 65 than under the age of 15. And of the things we can manage, that's not an easy one to manage. We've got a long-term challenge that we are going to have workers exiting the workforce. So when you look at what to do about that, you start and think about what has been the success in this country over the last generation, over the last 40 years. So it's not a hard insight. 1/3 of our economic growth over the last 40 years is due to the entrance of women into the workforce. 1/3. An incredible fact that has led us to be in a much better position today than we were 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. But what we've seen is that that's stalled. Over the last decade and a half, we've had less advancement. We can say that we're pleased with women's workforce participation, but I would argue that being 8th out of 29 countries in the OECD, that's probably not good enough. We can say that we have made progress in equal pay for equal work, but when we're 15th out of 29 in the OECD, I would say that's not good enough. So we know that we should focus on the place where we can have the most significant impact. If half of our population is in a position where they're not doing as well as they should be, where all the opportunities that they want are not necessarily open to them, that's a place where we can make an important difference if we can get it right. I'm not arguing that getting it right is easy, but I am saying that it's critically important and we need to get on with the business at hand. We know that being in a good economic situation right now puts us in a favorable position, not only to think about long-term issues, but also to think about short-term challenges. Some of the things that some of you in this room and others outside this room have talked to me about was the important challenges that we're facing right now. We, of course, are facing an important discussion with the United States around NAFTA. It's critically important that we present Canada in the strongest light possible, that we work towards getting what we hope will be a better deal, but that we don't expect that it'll be easy, and we don't believe that we should just take any particular deal. We know that having a strong economy places us in a good position to actually do that negotiation. We do, however, know that we need to consider how we continue with a positive long-term economic situation in spite of these challenges. We know that right now, of course, the United States has made some changes in tax rates. And there's been more than a few people in the business community who've talked about that. We know that it's important, first of all, to be in a strong economic position so that we can be competitive against anybody around the world. But also we need to take a look carefully and make sure that our tax rates, but our overall economy stays competitive. And that's our commitment. We're working hard to make sure that we understand those changes, the impacts, both immediate and longer term on our economy, and make sure we react in a way that is appropriate to the challenges at hand. I want to assure you that we will do our homework in that regard. And as the Americans write the actual regulations around those tax changes, which have not yet been fully written, we will consider them and make sure that we ensure that our country remains competitive. But our long-term focus is very much about thinking about what we can do for the next generation, the generation after that. Focusing on women's participation in the workforce is critically important. You've probably read some of the stories and some of the studies that have led us to conclude that we really should be doing more work in this regard. McKinsey Global Institute came out and said that if we actually were able to get more women into the technology fields, into science, technology, engineering, and math, if we're able to raise participation rates, by 2026 we can have about an extra $150 billion to our economy. Now, putting that in context, that's an enormous number. Our economy right now is about $2.2 trillion, so you can do the math. What RBC talked about in one of their studies was if we had better workforce participation, full workforce participation of men and women at an equal rate this past year, our economy would have been 4% better off. 4% is huge. If we could only get half of that, 2%, that would be a material change to our economic forecasts. So we know that we can do more in this regard, but we know that it's going to take long-term efforts. I can tell you that we were starting from on this from day one. The Canada Child Benefit, which I talked about, which provided more money to families, it's true that on average it gave 9 out of 10 families $2,300 more after tax. But what it did was for single women who were parents, who earn on average under $60,000 in this country, gave them about $9,000 per year. So $9,000 to consider how they're going to raise their kids, what they're going to do with childcare, the things that matter most to them and their family. That was a starting point for us. 2017, we said there's more that we need to do to get at real challenges. We put in place a $7.5 billion plan over 11 years for childcare. What we said we were going to do is negotiate with the provinces to figure out how best to deliver childcare across our country. And what we've seen over the last year is that we've got now 9 agreements between provinces and territories, and they're all different. Each province has taken a slightly different approach to how to deal with childcare. So we've given the provinces the ability to tailor it by local needs and challenges. In some provinces, it's training more childcare workers. In others, it's more rural spaces. In others, it's more opportunities for people to have urban childcare spaces in their environment. So starting down that path was important, but also recognized that we need to deal with some other things. We put in place last year a national housing strategy, which is now being rolled out across the country, recognizing that especially for families that are in a challenging position, we need to deal with the affordable housing challenge, especially in some of our cities where that's a big problem. So it's a $40 billion plan with the provinces to roll out, to create more spaces, to renovate existing spaces. We've also put in place rental construction financing, so organizations like Great Gulf here can have the access to financing through the CMHC that will allow for more rental units to be built over the course of the future. This year in our budget, we decided to put more money in that regard. We had last year $2.5 billion in capacity for the CMHC. It was oversubscribed. From our standpoint, this is great news. It means people are going to build more rental facilities across our country. So we put another $1.25 billion of capacity in our budget this year, which will create another, we estimate, 14,000 rental spaces across our country. These are enormous initiatives to make a difference for families, to make a difference for especially families that are in a most challenging position, and that will have a differential impact on women. This year, we said we need to keep down this path. Of course, the acknowledgement that women share a greater burden of the raising of children is an obvious one. We said that there's something we can do in that regard. In Quebec, they've put in place over the last few years a position where they can have the second parent in a 2-parent family take 5 weeks off that's use it or lose it. So if they want to take that parental leave, they can take an extra 5 weeks. And if they don't take it, the couple loses it. What's happened in Quebec is that's meant that 80% of couples actually both take time off for parenting duties. In the rest of the country, it's 12%. We want to nudge families to make sure that they're actually sharing parental responsibilities more evenly. And what we know that will do, it'll mean that when there's an employer who sees 2 people who are 28 years of age come into their office, and one's a male and one's a female, they'll realize that both of these 2 individuals are likely to take some sort of parental leave over time. Both of these people are going to have some sort of responsibility for parenting so that we can drive long-term change in attitudes, creating more opportunity for women to get back into the workforce, yes, but changing behavior among employers as well. And I know that many of you in this room do a huge amount in your organizations to actually increase women's participation, to ensure that your workforce is fair. Well, I'd say that what we're trying to do federally is encourage that behavior to see if we can all together do more to make a real difference on what is an important opportunity for our country. We've said many other things in terms of helping women are a real challenge. We recognize that there's not as much opportunity for women entrepreneurs. So this year we said, not only do we expect the Business Development Bank of Canada to help with mentoring women entrepreneurs, not only did we put money into our regional development agencies so women entrepreneurs can benefit from accelerators and incubators, but we put in $1.4 billion of financing at the Business Development Bank of Canada so women-led businesses can get more access to finance. Our observation was they weren't getting nearly as much as men-led businesses were. 1 out of 6 businesses are female-led businesses, but they're not experiencing the same level of success. So more money for access to capital there, more money as well through the Export Development Corporation. What I can tell you is that we believe that these initiatives over the long term will have an important impact. But of course, they're not the only things in our budget that we're very focused on the long term. We know that having the kind of innovative society we all want means we have to have a robust research and science environment. We know that being successful over the long term, innovation comes from great ideas, from a place where people can get the kind of education they need, but also the opportunity to use that education in a way that will drive not only new science, but new innovation and eventually growth. So we've made the largest investments in fundamental research that we've ever had in this country. It's significant in terms of the opportunities for young researchers. Over $3 billion of investments in fundamental science. Importantly, what we heard from the Naylor report, which we commissioned last year, was that we needed more opportunities for young researchers, more opportunities for interdisciplinary research, and more opportunities to bring women into the research field because we were seeing too much of the granting money going to the people who'd been there for a long time. They're obviously very successful, but we might not be getting the new, exciting opportunities. So we said by putting more money in, we're going to drive to more interdisciplinary research that brings in younger researchers and more female researchers, tilting it towards the future in a way that we think will have a big and positive impact. We know also that we need to think about real challenges in this country as opportunities. So when I think about the challenges we face in making sure that Indigenous Canadians are successful, we start with basic challenges, like we don't have clean drinking water in all parts of our country. It's not acceptable. So we said we need to do better. We've made improvements. We've lifted 52 drinking water advisories over the last couple of years, but it's by no stretch good enough. So we put more money into making sure that we will have clean drinking water everywhere in this country by March 2021. We've said that we need to do more, though, in other areas. We have a situation where our Indigenous Canadians, about 7.7% of the people in this country who are under the age of 14 are Indigenous. Yet about 50% of the people under the age of 14 that are in foster care are Indigenous. So this really isn't good enough. If we are putting ourselves in a situation where the fastest growing single part of our population is experiencing such enormous challenges, we need to do better. So we put significant funding, $1.4 billion, into family and child services for Indigenous Canadians. We recognize also that we need to deal with long-term health challenges. So we put $1.5 billion into dealing with health challenges for Indigenous Canadians. Challenges that, frankly, we're not seeing everywhere else in the country. Challenges like access to health care in remote and really difficult to get at places. Challenges like tuberculosis in parts of this country that maybe some of you don't see on a regular basis. Certainly we don't in other parts of the country. We need to get at this. We need to do better, and we're committed to doing that. We do know, however, that there's other things that we need to think about as we think about the very long term. What is Canada all about? We're about a place where people can be successful, yes, where we have a great opportunity for generations to come. And one of the great things we have is a wonderful environment. Back in 2010, we made a commitment that we would protect 17% of our country. This was an important commitment that we made. We would protect our lands, we would protect our coastal regions. So we made a commitment of $1.3 billion to actually follow through on that commitment to protect the spaces for the next generations to come in a way that we can all say that this will still be a country where you have access to great places to go and see especially in nature. Finally, last but not least, we, as you may know, are president at the G7 this year. We've made a significant commitment to up the ante on our international development. It's important, we believe, as a leader in the world, that we do better in this regard. We've made a commitment that we can do more in particular for women and girls around the world in helping with poverty reduction and helping ensure that, even from a security standpoint, the world's better tomorrow than it is today. So it's an ambitious agenda. It's one that thinks about how we can help Canadians today, how we can deal with the long term. And I will tell you that in my job, I get the opportunity to go out and meet people every once in a while that really inspire you to make a difference. A few weeks ago, while I was preparing for the budget, I was out at Algonquin College, and I met a woman there who was telling me about her opportunity to change careers. So this was a woman who'd gone back to work, or gone back to school after raising her children, and she'd gone to Algonquin College, her name's Joan, to do event planning. When she got there, she decided that, in fact, what she wanted to do was enter one of the trades. So now she's an apprentice plumber. And it's a sort of spirit that inspires you to think about what we need to do, all of us together. The reason we're putting money into helping people with skills, with pre-apprenticeship training and apprenticeship training, is because we know that for us to survive and for us to thrive, we're going to need to consider what are the ways we can have the biggest impact on ourselves and our families, but also on the economy over time. And Joan took a courageous decision to go back and do something that, as she told me, was not expected by anybody that she knew, but was really what she found out a true calling for her. So we want to see more Canadians like that, people who take the opportunities. We're going to continue to make investments in Canadians, whether it be through Canada Student Grants, whether it be through Canada Summer Jobs, whether it be through apprenticeship training, or creating a sort of innovative environment that creates those new and exciting jobs for the future. So it's really a pleasure to be here this morning to talk a little bit about our budget, and I expect now maybe to talk about the harder bits of the budget, since you'll have the Q&A bit. I want you to know that we will continue on our path not only to do what we think is right for the long run, but to deal with what we see are the short-term challenges and do it in a fiscally responsible way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And just a reminder, I am taking your questions, so if you write them down, people will collect them, they'll bring them to me, and I may or may not ask them. You did warn me you were going to go longer than you were supposed to.
Did I go much longer?
You went way over your time.
Oh, man.
But I won't give you a hard time because
one of the things you learn in the job is the longer I go on the speech, the fewer questions.
Oh, yeah. No, I get it. No, I would give you a hard time, but it's hard enough to be a white guy these days. And I won't actually raise the point that was raised the other day in the media that we've never had a woman finance minister in this country.
Well, you know, are you going to run?
No. So you talk about a budget that's reflective of Canadian values, and I think most people could look at this budget in that lens, that there is a lot in it that is about taking care of one another. As you note, the worker benefit, which is amazing, and people may not know this, but they've tweaked it so that low-income workers don't have to sign up for it. A lot of people were missing these kinds of benefits because they weren't filing their taxes. Those are good, socially positive things. The child benefit is great. It felt a little bit to me like you were focused on one part of the ledger, and it was the part of the ledger that where we share, where we redistribute. And even things like more women in the workforce and paying women more, very few people are going to get up and say those are bad ideas. But the money has to come from somewhere. And so far, it's come from consumers who are up to their ears in debt. And we need to have economic growth that's driven by startups, entrepreneurs, and big corporations, including foreign capital coming to this country. And that's where this budget, I think, didn't focus. You know these issues inside out. Why not? What is the thinking? I hate the word competitiveness. I don't know what it means until it shows up on the bottom line. But we know we're in a bit of trouble here. And I think this is a room full of people who need to know that answer.
of course, this is an important question, but let me just question the frame for a second. So let's start with the Canada Workers' Benefit. We have made big changes in the Canada Workers' Benefit. In the CPP negotiation a couple of years ago, we put an extra $250 million into what we're calling the Canada's Workers' Benefit, which was the working income tax benefit. This past fall, we said we're going to put $500 million more there. And what we've said with this budget is we're going to give people the ability to get it automatically. We found that less wealthy Canadians that were eligible for this benefit were in many cases doing their taxes on paper, which meant they weren't automatically getting the benefit. So we said, well, if the benefit is meant for the challenged part of the population that wants to get into work, let's make sure they can get access to it. So we've made a really big difference. So there's going to be 300,000 more Canadians get the Canada Workers' Benefit. About 70,000 Canadians will be lifted out of poverty as a result of this. So this is where I want to attack your premise.
Okay.
So the premise is that somehow raising Canadians out of poverty isn't good for the economy. So let's take the second part of that premise. And it's not your premise, but the second part is, so the idea that we're going to have more women engaged in the economy and that we're going to have better success rates for women is somehow not about our competitiveness. So I would just argue that what have we shown in the last 2 years?
This may fly in the House, but it's not going to fly here.
Let me just...
The money has to come from somewhere.
Let me just...
Where does the money come from? I think those are very worthy and laudable things.
It is, but let me just ask people the question, what people in this audience are not considering outcomes? So when you make investments in Canadians and the outcome is we've had the fastest growth we've seen in more than a decade in our economy, we've seen more Canadians working than we've seen in, as I said, lowest unemployment rate in almost 40 years. This is the sort of thing that actually does drive the economy. So if you start with the fact that you have more people working, and you have more people who are actually being lifted out of really challenging positions. And by the way, those people actually put much more of the money back into the economy than people like me, being realistic, because as a percentage basis, if I'm getting more money, it's 100%. Not necessarily going in. So that's a foundation. We're not saying that we don't need to think about those competitive challenges. We're saying, let's start with our fortress here at home. If we have low unemployment rates, if we have an economic growth that's strong, let's be proud of where we're at. This is the best economy we've seen in a long time. So now, what are we going to do with that really great economy? And thank you, Christy Clark.
Yep.
What we're going to do with that really great economy is we're going to face up to those big challenges. So it's true that we need to deal with those challenges. And what I would argue is everyone here in this room knows what a balance sheet is and knows what an income statement is. Our balance sheet is great. It's the best in the G7. We're getting it better each and every year, which allows us to be resilient to face up to those challenges. Okay. And that's what we're going to do.
Thank you for getting to the income statement. Because
I want to stop on the balance sheet again.
Well, I know you do. I know we're supposed to look at net debt to GDP, but I don't want to. I want to look at deficits. Because, and this is a simplification that will drive some people batty, but I don't care. A deficit represents overspending. We make a pledge with you. We send you X amount of tax dollars. And what we're saying to you is, there's the pool. That's the kitty. To show us what you can do with that. And you're saying indefinitely, it's not enough. We're going to borrow against it. So I agree that investing in, you can't disagree, that investing in better health, better lives, better jobs for Canadians has a very virtuous circle, and we all benefit and the economy grows. But unless the funding for that begins to come from the private sector, and not, so far it's been public sector debt and consumer debt. We need the private sector to be growing. So let's go back to tax reform, US tax reform. I don't think, was it even on the table for you to lower taxes in this budget for corporate? I don't think it was. Did it even cross your mind that?
Is that the question we're going to get to?
That's my question, yeah.
So,
did you think about it?
We, first of all, I guess what I would say is, having run a business, I didn't consider the entire competitive framework about taxes. What did I start with? I said, do we have a strong, well-educated workforce? Do we have the kind of ecosystem, including science, including innovation, that makes sense? Do we have the kind of institutions that are strong and resilient, including the banking sector that's kept us in a strong position for years? Do we have, as I said before, a good balance sheet? Yes, taxes are an important part of that. So we, of course, need to remain competitive. But what we won't do is we won't react in any sort of knee-jerk fashion without fully understanding the ramifications. We have the lowest tax rate for small businesses among G7 countries. We are in a situation where the US tax rate, yes, has changed. So the top corporate tax rate has gone down to an average of about 25.8, when we're at about 26.8. So yes, they're now in a situation where it's about 1 percentage points less than us. There's a lot of details to figure out because they've changed their ability to actually expense their interest charges. They've changed a number of other details, and many of the regulations are not written. So what I would say to everyone in this room, and what I would say to anybody in the business community, is we know that having a competitive tax environment is important. We know that none of you would expect in your businesses that you would come to conclusions without doing your homework. If you did, you'd lose your investors. And we're not going to do that on behalf of you. We're going to make sure that we actually do our homework and get it right. So to the extent that we conclude, and that conclusion has not been made, that there's a competitive threat as a result of taxes, we will take a look at that threat. But I don't want anybody to sort of slag our country and say that what we win on is the basis of the lowest tax rates. Because if that were true, then there'd be other countries that can go lower than us. We do have the highest educated workforce among the OECD. We do have really great attributes in this country that we know we can expand and do better with. And we can exercise the sort of opportunity that we have in things like fundamental science and research that will lead to better things for our children and for our grandchildren than we have today through opportunities that will be right here in Canada. That's what we're thinking about. Short term is important. We also need to keep our eye on the long ball.
We have a question here about, as one might expect, small business tax reform. Obviously, a terrible time for you in terms of presenting. It felt a little bit like, Mom and Dad, I have cancer. Nope, I'm just quitting med school. Because what I'm hearing from the small business community is this is less bad. It's less horrible than it was before. But you did take a lot of consultation on this. Do you feel like you've landed in a place that is what you want? You're satisfied with this?
We think we landed in the place where we wanted to land in, of course. But let me take you back. So what did we announce last summer? We said to ourselves that we'd seen a rapid increase of people privately incorporating. It's happened over the course of the last decade. And in many cases, people were privately incorporating because there were big tax advantages. We know that we want to have small businesses that have the opportunity to invest and grow. But we don't want people just to incorporate so they can share their income with someone who's not involved in their business or defer a huge amount of tax. So we said we need to get this right. Where did we land? We landed that if you're in a small business and your children or your spouse have nothing to do with the business, then you can't lower your taxes just because you happen to have children. We landed in a place where now we've said if you have a significant amount, millions of dollars of passive investment income in this private corporation that's not being invested back into the business, then you're not going to have the small business tax rate anymore. Because the small business tax rate is intended to have small businesses actually reinvest in their business, create jobs, and grow the economy. So if you are in a situation where your business is earning $500,000 a year and you have millions of dollars in passive investment income, you should expect that you won't be seen as a small business anymore. So I think we landed in the place that does what we said we wanted to do. Encourage small businesses to be successful, but don't have a situation where a small number, and impacted private corporations is about 2%, have significant advantage not available to everybody else. It was, of course, a challenging fall. Politics is a rough sport. I've learned that things don't have to be true.
Why I would never run, Minister.
Yeah, there you go. But it's also a huge privilege. I mean, you get the opportunity to do things that can make a difference. And it's a particularly huge privilege in times like this where you can see that actually what is happening has been very positive in terms of outcomes for people and, of course, broadly for our economy.
We do have a question about business investment. The most recent data, of course, is not good, which speaks, I think, to a kind of a lack of confidence or a certain level of uncertainty about many things, not least NAFTA, this tax reform uncertainty is out there, the effect of U.S. taxes. The question is whether you think about what you can do policy-wise to change that mindset, to encourage businesses to invest. What are the levers you have?
It's, of course, real that people feel a level of uncertainty as we go through these NAFTA discussions. We have to acknowledge that. People are watching closely to make sure that the competitive environment in our country stays strong. We do have to also acknowledge that our economy is doing well right now. So we are in a strong place to actually have that challenge presented to us. What can government do? We need to be careful not to think that government can do everything, but you've seen us take some important initiatives. So we've said to Canadians that we think we should find a way to invest in places where Canada has what we'd call a differential advantage. What did we say? We said in advanced manufacturing, a place for us to invest. In the digital sector, a place for us to invest. In clean technology, in clean resources, 2 other places for us to invest. In science and in health science, in agriculture. So 6 sectors that we said, these are important places for us to invest. Last year, and some of you probably would have been involved in this, we said that we were going to take an approach where we could think about collaborating with universities and businesses and the government together to make investments in some of those sectors of the economy. We called it a superclusters approach. So we put significant funding, about $950 million in, and we chose 5 consortiums on the basis that government was going to put money in, but that universities were going to put expertise in, and business was going to put funding in, and that it wasn't going to go directly back to the businesses, but to actually expand those sectors. So that's the sort of thing that we think we can encourage investment from the business sector. That is happening now. I think we've got 5 really great ideas that we're working on. But I wouldn't say that we can solve the problem as a federal government in terms of the concern, the uncertainty around NAFTA in any other way than being absolutely strong at the negotiating table to try to get to a good position, to deal with things like the ongoing need for competitiveness in our country, which we are engaged with and thinking about, and find ways to encourage the private sector to be part of the solution. The things we've done over the course of the last couple of years, in many cases, have co-opted or worked together with the private sector. So when we put in place the Canada Infrastructure Bank, it was a recognition that we can do more infrastructure if we bring in institutional investors and pension investors, that we can take $1 of federal or provincial funding and find $5 of funding from those institutional investors that want to invest in long-term infrastructure. When the banks came together to put together the Business Growth Fund to try and help second stage growth in companies, that was an initiative that we worked together with the bank and the financial sector. So we're trying to work together to make an important difference, recognizing that our job first and foremost is to think about the nature of the environment and the competitive environment which we are thinking about.
The long-term investment in science, again, very hard for one to be critical of investing in pure research. It's a departure from years of cutting pure research. You have made targeted investments. Those are bets that you make with majority governments. They're bets that pay off over the long term. You can't possibly point to jobs next year that come from it, except maybe a few grad students. But unless we...
Actually, a lot of grad students.
A lot of, no, and that's a good thing. But unless we commercialize the outcome of some of that research, including in AI, what is the benefit to Canadians of spending this money? And I guess from your point of view, what needs to happen to encourage better commercialization? Because that historically is where Canada falls down. We are great at ideas, and then we deliver them to other people to commercialize and get wealthy off.
I think this is an important observation, and it would be a challenge to the business sector as well. We've said there's a number of things that we need to do better at. So we've put in place an approach to dealing with an intellectual property strategy this year that we're working towards delivering on, including a patent collective so that people can have better access to IP in their businesses. We've talked about how important it is for government to get more efficient. We looked at all of our innovation programs as a government over the course of the last year. There were 92 programs that businesses could come in to think about how they could grow their business. We winnowed them down to what will be, in the end, about 36. We've made it simpler for people to get in. We focused funding in places where we know we're having a strong impact, like the Industrial Research Assistance Program, the IRAP program. So we're looking at how we can deal with that. We've also said that we want to now deal with regulation. We want to see if we can simplify regulation in this country. We've identified some sectors, the transportation sector, the health bioscience sector, as two obvious ones where we can look at, the agricultural sector as well. So we're going to try and winnow down the number of regulations as well, which should enable business. But you're right, commercialization is a challenge in this country. A starting point is having the investment in fundamental research. Another important point is to make sure that you fund for the costs, the administrative costs, which we did increase funding for that as well, so institutions can support their researchers. But there will always be more to do in this regard. And I do think that as a country, we have an opportunity to do better.
Arguably, one of the limits to our competitive ability, the reason that our businesses aren't more efficient and productive, has to do with internal trade issues, province-to-province barriers. And that is something that it's not in the federal government's mandate, but I watched the pipeline dispute going on between Alberta and British Columbia, and I'm wondering whether the federal government has been reluctant to play the strong leadership role it needs to play for Canadians.
I will tell you that we have said from the time we announced it and continue to say that we think the Kinder Morgan pipeline is an important idea, that we need to be able to get a price for our resources that is closer to the world price. And we recognize that getting access to markets is a critical factor in that. So we've been stalwart in that effort. What I can tell you is that we have been engaged in this discussion. So everything that happens in government you don't actually see on the front page of the paper, so you know. So we have been engaged in these discussions to try and make sure that we resolve this challenge. In my estimation, progress is being made. We're going to stay on this file. We think it's important, and that'll be our continuing approach, trying to get things done in a practical way that are sometimes challenging. The fact that interprovincial barriers exist is, of course, a frustration. I mean, it doesn't often seem to make sense that you have different trucking regulations in different provinces. We are trying to work on that too. I think former Premier Christy Clark can tell you how challenging that is at times, but we need to move that forward every single day. We made some progress last year. There's certainly more work to be done. You have a majority government, and majority governments mean you can do big, bold things. A former finance minister told me on budget day that you would be happy if we described this as a quiet budget, that that's a good day for a finance minister. I'm not sure you would agree with that, but what is the big vision in your, not for the government, but for Bill Morneau as finance minister? You've been there long enough, you get the game. You may only have a year and a half left to do what you can do for Canada. What is it? Well, let me start by agreeing with that former finance minister. I was out talking to the... okay, then I'll say it was Carol Taylor. Okay. I was mentioning to the young people who were taking all of our badges when we came in, I said, I'm not on the front page of the paper today, so it's a really good day. We had one day, and we announced what we're trying to do, and now the policy experts are writing articles about the things that we're trying to achieve. And that's, we hope, the way it should be. We've said this is the direction, the course we want to chart, and people are now examining the details of the policy prescriptions. So what is it that I want to achieve? I mean, I think I don't see myself as different from the government in this regard. If more Canadians can feel more success from a high level of economic growth, that's the outcome that we're trying to achieve. It's not the opposite, a higher level of growth so that it might trickle down. We do need to think about what people send us to government to do, and it's about making their lives and their families' lives better. And that means not thinking just about any particular subset. So when you look back and say, what can you be really proud of? If 600,000 more people are working, if we have more people that are able to get to university and not be left encumbered with significant financial debt, if we have more opportunities for those people to have really great careers that actually stimulate great growth in this country. I mean, it's not any one individual measure of absolute success, but those are the sort of markers that, you know, for my kids and for hopefully all of your kids, that'll make this country better over the long term. And then there's the other things that we're trying to do as a government. We want to have an environment that's strong for years to come, of course. We want to make sure that we don't leave people behind, that that we can't leave behind because it's the wrong thing to do. So there's many goals, but that big fundamental goal of getting people engaged and active is really the first order of business.
All right, we're at time, but you went over, so am I. Do you have a desire before you leave government, whether that's in a year and a half or five and a half years, to put us on the fiscally prudent path?
I do intend on running again. I think that was an implicit question there.
No, the question was whether you win.
Well, I think that part of the answer is about winning. You said, do we intend to put Canada on a fiscally prudent path? And I think what the answer is, and what I would hope people would take away, is that if our economy is growing at the fastest pace we've seen in more than a decade, if we have the lowest unemployment rates we've seen in coming on 40 years, if we have a continuing lowest level of debt as a function of our economy among G7 countries, and if that's getting lower every single year, which it is, that is a fiscally prudent path. I would say that the frame that you're talking about, that austerity versus investment frame from the last election campaign, we've said that making investments works. And by the way, it's working. So we are seeing ourselves growing the economy and finding a way to actually maintain that growth. I would argue that the opposite tack of making cuts would actually have the opposite impact of actually lowering our growth and putting us in a worse financial situation. So fiscally prudent means doing the things that are going to grow the economy, make things better for people, and by the way, it'll make it better for all of us at the same time.
Even if you're running deficits?
The point here is that we're moving on a path that's fiscally responsible, and I think that not everyone in this room is going to go back and say, you know what, I'm going to get rid of my mortgage now. They're going to say that, you know, I'm going to manage this over time in the way that makes most sense, because that's the way I should best manage my financial affairs, and that's exactly what we're doing. If we were going in the opposite direction, you can see what's happening in the United States right now. They've made some tax changes that means that their deficit compared to ours on a per capita basis is 5 to 1. 5 to 1, that's what they're doing for their economy. Now, we're not taking that approach. We're saying we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to continue to grow our economy. We don't want to overheat our economy so our interest rates go up rapidly. We want to do it in a managed way, and that's exactly what we're doing.
All right,
we'll leave it there. Thanks for being here. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Morneau.
You want us to go down?
My name is Barbara Jessen. I'm president of the Empire Club, and it's my great pleasure to thank Amanda and our Minister of Finance. Amanda, first of all, thank you so much. You're tough in a very nice way. And all of us here, of course, wish you every happiness in your pending marriage. Congratulations. There's no role in government more important to the future of our country than the finance portfolio. Our finance minister must balance the often competing interests of his fellow cabinet ministers, regional and provincial concerns, private enterprise, private lobbies, citizen action groups, public sentiment, along with his own goals and the long-term vision and goals of the Prime Minister. For good measure, throw in the sometimes volatile currents that can assault us from outside our boundaries, and somehow you have to find a way and find the resources to pay for it all and guard the public purse in the process. And now, of course, the finance minister must incorporate into his considerations a broad understanding of financial matters that exist in a virtual world outside his direct control, as well as the recent introduction of a revolutionary new currency, Bitcoin, and the blockchain, the next global disruptor. Canadians owe you an enormous debt of gratitude for your courage in stepping up to the plate during these most challenging times. We wish you success as you put your plans for our nation to work. Bonne chance avec la réalisation de votre stratégie. Thank you for honoring a long-standing tradition of joining us all at this special joint session of the Canadian Club and the Empire Club of Canada, and sharing with us your thoughts and your budget for the year ahead. I also want to express a sincere thank you to our sponsors. We couldn't make occasions like this happen without you, and we're particularly grateful for this morning's support. the Carpenters District Council, Great Gulf Residential, and the Canadian Credit Union Association. Thank you so much. We're very, very grateful. Without sponsors like this, we just wouldn't exist as clubs. We also want to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, for webcasting today's event for thousands of viewers around the world. Thank you to the National Post, our print sponsor, and thank you for your attendance at our meeting today. It is now adjourned.